Former manager, let's not meet. So this happened quite a while ago, but it just came to my brain again after reading a story about someone's experience at work with a customer. Have a story about the weirdest shit I've ever been a part of. Probably around 2 years ago, I got a job at a certain Australian rip-off steakhouse in my hometown. I was really excited to start this job, because it had been the first time I'd had a job while in school that year due to how busy I was. It was a nice, healthy distraction from constant schoolwork and extracurriculars. Plus, I was getting paid. Being able to afford food was a fun thought. I don't think I'd ever been so excited to buy hamburger meat. My days there were a lot of fun, but we had this one horribly mean manager named Steven that would get super upset and angry at other employees. But he would never get upset at me. Steven was probably in his mid-60s, and he was the kind of guy you could just tell hadn't been happy with how his life had turned out. Now, I was a super hard worker and liked my job, but there were definitely some times that I deserved to get yelled at. But he never would. Never raise his voice at me. All of my coworkers started making jokes that I was Steven's favorite. It got to the point where I'd be on shifts with some other girls, and he would rip into them for stuff that was definitely wrong on both of our parts, but he would never touch me. Eventually, I wasn't capable of putting up with the poor treatment of my coworkers anymore, and pulled another manager, let's call him Elliot, aside to see how I could file a complaint or get justice for my fellow servers. Elliot and I had become super close since I started working there, and when he sat me down, he held me as I cried over my uncertainty. This job meant the world to me, and I didn't want to lose it. He reassured me that I was alright, and that he would handle it. Over the next few weeks, he would make me feel better whenever something happened, and he would constantly reassure me that my actions from corporate was coming. About 2 months after the original complaint, I had decided to take on vacations to Texas to visit my mother. I said bye to everyone at work for a whole 2 weeks, and had so much fun hanging out with my mom. Easily the break I needed from the work environment. Not too long after I get back from my vacation, I come back to work, and just after a few shifts, I realize that Elliot isn't there anymore. I figured that Steven had fired him for standing up, and I was livid. In my anger, I started talking to my coworkers about the bullshit, and they all looked at me confused and baffled by what I was saying. After stopping mid-sentence and asking them why they were all looking at me like that, a coworker corrected me and told me that's not why he got fired at all. Elliot had been caught keeping 2 8-year-old boys in his basement. Elliot was arrested, and that's why he was fired. Apparently, he had also been caught in the past for publicly urinating on a 7-year-old and beating his own children who got taken away from him permanently when he went to prison the first time. Both boys were safely returned to their parents, but they've been there for at least 2 months, from what I remember. Needless to say, I was done with that restaurant and quit on the spot. So Elliot, do me a big ol' favor, and let's not meet again. Did you like watching? Longtime lurker, first-time poster, so go easy on me. For context, I'm a 21-year-old female college student living in the US. Let me say that I was extremely sheltered growing up by overly controlling parents, and because of this, I didn't recognize red flags when this was happening. Yes, I realized how stupid I was. This all began when I was 16 years old, and I got my first job. I started working at Panera a few weeks before the end of my junior year in high school. The city I grew up in is listed as one of the safest in the country, so I've always been a little too trusting of bad people. Something that's bit me in the ass multiple times. I was super excited about having my first real job, and thus having some money and freedom from my parents. My first week was spent learning the basics and meeting all of my new coworkers. This is when I first met Andrew. Andrew was a pretty good-looking 26-year-old Hispanic dude. He always talked to me, and as a young, naive kid, I honestly loved the attention. He would shower me with compliments and buy me food after every shift. Pro tip, Panera workers get 65% off anything. The comments he made slowly became more and more sexual in nature. It started with him telling me how good my hair smelled, and then how great my butt looked in my work pants. I was used to him complimenting me, so I didn't see this as weird yet. I started dating my boyfriend, and he would ask me explicit questions about my sex life. One time, he asked if I liked my hair pulled and yanked hard on my ponytail. I definitely thought it was weird at this point, but I didn't realize how weird until I told my boyfriend and he freaked out. I was still in denial and thought that this was just him being jealous that I was getting attention from other men. My coworkers started asking me about him, saying he was obsessed with me. One manager even said Andrew had a countdown to my 18th birthday on his phone. After about a year working at Panera, we had a late-night meeting with all the employees about the new menu items. I hadn't seen Andrew for a month or two, and I knew he had been getting serious with his girlfriend, so I assumed everything would stop. The second I walked into the cafe, I felt his eyes on me. I looked over and waved to acknowledge him, and he smiled at me like he just won $1 million. He ran over and gave me a too tight hug while sniffing my hair. He had a wicked grin on his face. God, I've missed you so much. You can't get away from me that easily. Thankfully, the meeting started, and I didn't have to say anything back. He stared at me the entire meeting, and afterwards I ran to my car as fast as I could, so I didn't have to talk to him. It was at that point that I started carrying a knife. One night, Andrew's shift was over about 30 minutes before mine. I left the store after it closed and walked to my car. All of a sudden, I hear people's voices and looked into the car next to mine. Andrew was laying in his car butt-ass naked, fucking his girlfriend, and just staring at me. I was so shocked I couldn't even move. When we made eye contact, he winked and motioned for me to join with a sick smile on his face. That was enough to snap me out of it, and I got in my car and drove away with shaking hands, trying not to vomit. I could not get the image of him out of my head until I saw him again a week later. We closed together, just the two of us, and a manager who stayed in the office. At this time, Andrew had become a manager in training, but still, I avoided him like the plague all night, even though he told me a bunch of instructions I had to do. Right when I was about to leave, he ran up to me and asked for a ride, saying his car was in the shop and he would have to walk an hour to get home. I stupidly said yes. This was before Uber was a thing. We made small talk the whole way to his apartment. It was only about 15 minutes, but it felt like years. When I pulled up to his building, he suddenly placed a hand on my leg and stroked my thigh. Did you like watching? Watching what? Watching my girl ride me. I told him I wasn't watching, and he just laughed and leaned in closer. At that moment, my heart was racing, and I was cursing myself, trying to remember where I placed my knife. Do you like riding men like that? Do you want me to teach you? I felt my body go into full fight or flight mode. I was 17 years old at this point, which is the age of consent in Texas, but it felt so wrong for a man 10 years older than me to ask me something like that. I think I blacked out for a second, because I honestly have no idea how I got him out of my car. I think I'd said something about my mom expecting me, and the next thing I remember was pulling over in a gas station and sobbing on the phone to my boyfriend. Looking back, I know I should have called the cops, but I was raised in a household where I would have been blamed for everything, so I never did. And honestly, some of the blame falls on me for being so stupid and not realizing the situation I was getting myself into. I told my favorite manager at the time, a very intimidating-looking African-American guy who was actually a huge teddy bear, about the whole ordeal, and made sure our shifts never crossed. Thanks to him, I never saw Andrew again, but that didn't stop him from leaving me little notes where he knew I'd eventually find them. I had an escort walk me to my car every single night after close, just in case. So, creepy Panera Andrew, I hope we never meet again, so let's not meet ever again. No, I'm not married. My dad owns a construction company, and during the summertime, I used to work there for some extra cash. Mostly, my job was to clean and to assist the supervisors with whatever they needed. It was hard work with unbearably hot conditions due to Alabama summers, but it paid well and gave me something to do. I was the only female who worked there, and so it was not uncommon for creeps to mess with me. Currently, I am 24 years old. This particular incident happened when I was 16, during my first year of working this job. Now, for those who don't know, construction companies usually have their own employed workers to oversee the construction, while other companies are hired to do specialty work, such as electricity, plumbing, painting, etc. So the job site is filled with complete strangers who are there to do their job and then go home. They rarely try to strike up a conversation with you or even acknowledge your existence. Well, most of the time. We were in the middle of building a 3-story high church. There were 2 stairways, and my job was to scrub all the steps down with a toothbrush. This was a tedious, and the easiest thing to do for me was to just sit on the steps as I worked. This meant I was unintentionally out of sight, and I worked quietly. I was about halfway down the stairs, and there's a landing at the halfway point where pipes and AC ducts are running through the walls. I could hear a man cursing to himself as he attempted to install a pipe. I had not seen him yet, but I could hear him. I didn't give it a second thought and just quietly continued working. As I scooted further down the stairs, the man notices me. He begins to apologize, saying things like, "Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm sorry for my language. If I'd seen you, I wouldn't have said it." I glance up at this and see what this guy looks like. He's obviously not one of your workers, but belongs to one of the other companies we had hired. He looked to be about in his 40s and is a carbon copy of Steve Buscemi if Steve Buscemi was bald and missing some teeth. I reassure him that's fine, and that I hear worse in school. He chuckles at this, and we both began working again. He then starts to make small talk, asking which school I go to, how old I am, and is one of the construction workers my dad, etc. I'm not really in the mood to talk, especially for small talk, but I do my best to answer him politely, while also being very short with him, hoping he will realize I don't really want to be bothered. When I answer his question about my age with, "I'm 16, he looks intensely at me and says, "You're 16 and already married?" My mind immediately goes to what the fuck mode. Why would he think that statement was perfectly normal to make, despite the fact that had nothing to do with our conversation? He sees my confused expression and grins, clarifying, "Your ring." At the time, I had a silver band ring that I wore on my left ring finger, giving the appearance of a wedding ring. I simply wore it there because that's the finger it fits best. I'm immediately uncomfortable with how things are going. I'm at least 15 feet away from him, and he still somehow noticed that small ring on my finger? Him questioning me about marriage was already unsettling in itself. I'm a 16-year-old kid, and he's old enough to be my dad. I explain that it's not a wedding ring. He laughs at that and says, "All us men should consider ourselves lucky then." I scrunch my face up, unsure of what he means or whether or not it's an insult or something. He explains, "Because you're still single, I mean." Officially uncomfortable, I turn back around and begin fiercely cleaning the stairs and praying that this guy finishes what he's doing so he can leave. I refuse to move down the stairs any further until he's gone. I don't want to get closer to him. Several uncomfortable questions later, the guy seems to finish and leaves. I breathe a sigh of relief and work on finishing the stairs. About 10 minutes later, the guy comes back with a cold bottle of Mountain Dew and holds it right in front of my face. I gingerly take it and he says, "It's pretty hot in there. You look like you needed it." "Thanks," I replied. He then goes back to working in the stairwell while I just sit there and stare at my drink in my hand. It was strange. There was no electricity or AC in the building yet, so it's very dang hot. This church is in the middle of nowhere. No gas stations or stores are close by. There's no vending machine out there either. It's toward the end of the day, so the ice in everyone's coolers has long since melted, and all their personal drinks are hot. Yet, this Mountain Dew is cold as ice. Cautiously, I open the bottle and quickly realize that the lid had already been cracked from someone opening it. They obviously try to reclose it in an attempt to hide the fact that it's been opened. I peer into the bottle to see little granules of something in the bottom of it. I quickly make the decision not to drink any of this. The guy had been watching me and questions why I haven't drank any yet. I just flat out ignore him and act like I didn't hear his question. Out of the corner of my eye, I realize that he hasn't brought any of his tools back with him, and that at first glance he looks like he's working. But when I pay close attention, I see that he's not actually doing anything. He's just making the motions of doing work while watching me when he thinks I'm not looking. He keeps insisting that I have to drink some because it's so hot and I look like I'm gonna overheat. When he is unable to get a response from me, he changes tactics and attempts to small talk again while I frantically try to think of how to get out of this situation. This part of the building is completely deserted. It's why I chose to clean those stairs first, so I wouldn't have to work around the other workers. The chances of someone walking through are non-existent. "You're working here with your dad, right? Who's your dad?" A maniacal grin spread across my face as I realize he's given me a way out. I answer, "Kelvin, the owner of this construction business." His face turns pale, and a reedy voice says, "Oh, the big boss, huh?" "Yep." He quickly decides he has somewhere else to be. He didn't attempt to interact with me for the rest of the day, but it did catch him staring intently at me whenever we were in the same room. I threw away the Mountain Dew. "So, Steve Buscemi lookalike, let's not meet again." Scary people who decide to work with children. So, these events go back a few years, so exact quotes may not be as accurate as I would like. Anyway, now that's out of the way. A few years ago, I had a job with my mother and my best friend Dan at Carousel Village, a carousel and minor attraction inside Roger Williams Park in Providence, Rhode Island. I do need to say that we worked there for many years before we were old enough to get real jobs, so this was really a lot of fun for us. Even so, we have quite the group of characters that I honestly never ever want to meet again. So let's start with a simple little story about a guy named Steven. Steven was a contractor hired by my boss Ron to do some work on the carousel mechanics and work in our cafe as well. This was about 2 years before I started working there. Every day he'd come in with his 5-year-old kid. This little kid used to grab handfuls of candy from the gift shop and just bolt out the fucking door. Now, I was working at my usual position as cashier for the gift shop when this first happened. And naturally, I freaked the fuck out and chased the kid out of the building. As I'm explaining to the kid why shoplifting is the bad thing, his dad Steven, who I never seen before, comes out of nowhere and just starts screaming at me for attacking his son when Ron said we could have anything we wanted in exchange for his contracting job. Okay, number one, step the fuck back, dude. You're like 6'1" and I'm 5'8", 17 years old, who just about to shit a brick from being yelled at by you. Number two, you did this shit 2 years ago and expect to just walk in and take handfuls of candy whenever the fuck you want. Okay, yeah, whatever. Ron comes over, explains the situation, and cools everyone off. Whatever. I leave the kid alone now. Sure, Steven's bag of dicks, but that's it. Now things get weird. So about a month later, Steven and his son comes in again and get in line for my mother's face painting table. When it's the boy's turn, Steven asks my mom if you paint him like a devil, to which my mom laughs and said sure. He continues, "'Cause we're devils. I sold my soul to a devil so I could live forever, you know?" My mom just nods and paints the kid for free, cause why would this weirdo pay for anything here anyways? Okay, sure, strange, kinda, but nothing too crazy. It gets weirder. A few weeks later, just Steven comes in. He's got this weird curly beard going on, kind of like Jafar from Aladdin, which I think is really strange. At this point, everyone knows about this guy and his weird shit. So as soon as he comes in, Dan and I look at each other and just go, fuck, and preface for some shit. He walks up to the counter, putting candy into his pocket and says, "Hey guys, I'm a pharaoh. Yeah, my son knows that when I die, he's gonna take my body in a special place so that I can get reanimated and won't come back as a cat again." Straight face, totally fucking serious. We nod and say congrats on the plan, and he just walks off. Dan and I look at each other and we're both freaked out. Ron takes the whole thing in stride like he usually does, joking with Steven that if he comes back as a cat, to stay away from Chinese food places. Steven gets kind of pissed, but Ron laughs it off. Okay, so the guy's Looney Tunes. That's meh, right? Now the scary bit. Steven then goes on to threaten the lives of a sponsor of the carousel, one of my coworkers, and about 5 customers, making vague threats about how they better enjoy their last carousel ride and shit like that. My mom calls the cops and explains that there's this guy threatening people. The cops show up and search his car, and they find a fucking loaded handgun. Yeah, so they took his ass away. And that was the last we heard of Steven. Well, sort of. A few years later, there was an article in the paper about Steven. He had been arrested for child molestation. Apparently. He'd been raping his little boy for years, and his ex-wife had just found out about it. So, there's weird, then creepy, then scary, then frightening, then sickening, all wrapped up into one person. So, Steven, when you get out of the ACI and are on the streets again, please, let's not meet again. Too friendly. The story I'm about to tell happened because I guess I'm too nice to people. When I was 17 years old, I was a pretty blonde girl who was very nerdy. I would often get guys who wanted to be more than friends when they found out I liked games and films, but they always just made their crushes known and I would gently let them down. I had a high school boyfriend at the time. I worked at a movie theater in the Midwest. I loved this job and became good friends with people I worked with. It was the perfect job for a teen who loved movies and needed to work after school. That was until I met Simon. Simon was a guy who worked at the theater with me. He seemed nice enough, a little geeky and not very attractive, but just like a regular guy, and I was as friendly as I can be. He was almost 10 years older than me, so I wasn't too worried about him thinking I wanted to be more than friends. As time went on, he gave me more and more attention, talking to me for hours during the downtime when movies were playing. I suspected he might like me, but I wasn't too worried, as he was a manager, and I wasn't, and dating between managers and staff was really not allowed, so I thought he would just keep it to himself. Then, a year after, I was asked to move to another theater, as the one I worked at would be shutting down in a few months. I agreed, but was the only member of staff to be offered this option. I realize now that this was not as fortuitous as I thought it would be. Just a week after I started the new theater, Simon showed up to say hi. I was friendly as always and was nice to him. After all, we were in the same movie chain, so he could come here to watch movies for free if he wanted to. I thought it was innocent, but soon started to feel uncomfortable with all the time Simon was spending hanging out at the theater, my theater. I asked my coworkers if he came in when I wasn't there, but they said no. Then it dawned on me that we no longer worked at the same theater, as he was free to pursue me romantically without worrying about his job. This made me worry, as he started outwardly if not awkwardly flirting with me. I found out later that a girl at my job who didn't like me had given Simon a copy of my schedule for the next 2 months. So I started to hide. Every time I saw him, I would make some excuse to go and hide in the stockroom or the projection booth. It was starting to make me feel very uneasy. My boss, who was still a great friend to me, noticed how uncomfortable I was and told me that if I wanted, I could report it to home office to get him to stop this. I thought this was taking it too far and I declined, thinking eventually he would give up. Well, he didn't. He came in close to my birthday and dropped off a card and a CD with lots of rather creepy music on it. I finally had enough and told my boss to report him. The management told him he wasn't allowed to come to my theater again or he would be fired. I didn't see him for a few months. I thought it was over. But then I had people I worked with at the old theater who went to high school with me coming up to me in the halls and cussing me out for getting Simon in trouble. They said that I had led him on and that he was a lonely guy who had a crush and it was a cruel that I got him in trouble or that I wouldn't give him a chance. I was horrified that he'd been spreading these rumors to people I thought were my friends and were now attacking me at my school. I spent the next few months afraid to go anywhere. I lived in a small town and was terrified of going out in case I ran into him. I'm a generally nervous person who scares easily, so my parents thought I was overreacting. My boss told me not to worry, and that Simon probably had given me up. Oh, how I wish that had been true. The day the old theater closed down, I was at work. I had to work late, and me and my boss were the last ones to leave for the night. My boss, Peter, asked me to wait for him so we could lock up together. It was about 2 a.m. once we left. The doors had been locked since 10 p.m., so no customers could get inside. As we walked out, my boss, who had kind of a sick sense of humor, was joking about Simon on his crush on me, probably trying to make light of it to cheer me up, I guess. When we stepped outside, I turned to lock the door, and my boss shouts, "There he is!" I thought he was joking again, and turned to tell him that it wasn't funny, but he wasn't joking. Simon was standing there, with just Peter between us. I froze. My entire body went rigid, and I didn't know what to do. I heard Simon say my name, and saw him try to get around my boss, but Peter spread his arms and blocked him from me. I saw that he had his eyes fixed on me. Peter told Simon to get out of here, and that I don't want to see him again. I struggled to unlock the door, which was notoriously sticky to get open. I could hear Simon trying to get my attention, but I just focused on the lock. Finally, it gave way and I rushed inside, running for the office, which had a deadbolt security door. I unlocked it and sat inside, hyperventilating. Peter came in and shut the door, checking I was okay. He told me he told Simon to go home and to not come back or he would call the cops. We sat in the office and waited for what seemed like forever. Peter then said he would go and check to make sure he had left, and I stayed inside the locked office. A few minutes go by, and I hear Peter's voice telling me that he was coming back in. When he opened the door, he looked furious and headed straight for the phone. I asked what was wrong, and he said that Simon was still out there. Apparently, he had parked in the shadow of the theater, where it is hard to see. He parked in such a way that I would have had to walk past him to get to my car. He had parked his van, a van I didn't know he had, in the shadows. Peter had found him crouched down beside the van, as if waiting for something, waiting for me to walk by. Peter had shouted he was calling the cops and then ran back inside. By the time the cops showed up, he had left. They took a statement and Peter gave them all of Simon's contact information, as it was still in the system. We guessed he showed up today because he was no longer at risk of losing his job, as the theater had closed down. I never saw Simon again, but it didn't mean I wasn't terrified. I might. I spent the whole year up until I moved away terrified I might run into him again. I never did, but it ruined what should have been a great summer before I left for college. I hate to think what would have happened if my boss hadn't been there that night, or hadn't been smart enough to check that Simon had left. I am still good friends with Peter. He even came to my wedding. I owe him an unknown debt. And to Simon, wherever you are, let's not meet again. A new job with one peculiar coworker. 2 years ago, I got hired on as a software developer for this fairly local company. The job was work from home, yet for the first week, I was required to come into the office, which turned out to be a personal residence. This formality was just to get everything set up, fill out paperwork, meet my coworkers, etc. Well, that's where my story begins. Day 1, I arrived precisely on time. I was given a warm welcome and introduced to the rest of the staff. Shortly after my arrival, a second character pulls into the driveway in this blue minivan. I instinctually note this vehicle's choice. Must be a family man, I think to myself, as I watch him walk up to the front door. My employer greets the newcomer, and a similar welcome is exchanged with a stranger. It appears I wasn't the only one who got hired for this position after all. The man is escorted up the stairs and introduced to me as one Josh Powell. I silently judge people upon first meeting them, and this guy made it a possible child molester within seconds of talking to them. Something was clearly off, but I attributed this odd behavior to Asperger's or something like that. It didn't take long before I saw the full scale of Josh's social oddities. He had the propensity for talking over people, including the boss, stealing the spotlight, peppering his comments with manipulative phrases that made him look good, and acting generally douchey. Again, I associated with some form of social inhibition or something. After we were given the grand tour of our new company, everyone was treated to a delicious lunch at a local restaurant. Things got interesting at that point. My new coworker manipulated odd topics in the conversation, which I took note of. He made sure to stress his love for his children in a forced, unnatural way, iterated over his need for controlling finances. I have no idea how he brought that up, and was fairly curt to the waiter who served us our food. The meal itself went over well enough, but I kept noticing these subtle comments and behavior traits that Josh radiated. Before the day was over, I had grown accustomed to cringing every time Josh opened his mouth. He was always rude, loud, and generally obnoxious. He made comments about things he clearly had no knowledge of, and this was just day 1. Something is definitely off about this man. After getting home, I went onto my computer and had the brilliant idea to look up my new coworker on Facebook. Maybe I could get some additional information about him. For whatever reason, perhaps fate, I did a standard search, and Facebook decided to look at news articles instead of people. Seconds after the search completed, my eyes got big. Holy shit, I thought to myself, as I read the article. Josh Powell, husband suspected of murdering wife. I looked closer at the picture and nearly had a heart attack from shock. That was indeed the man who I now considered my new coworker. I became obsessed with his case and was really tempted to try and befriend him in an effort to solve the murder mystery. I didn't get a chance though. Jump forward almost exactly a year later, and my hatred for him quickly skyrocketed until his untimely demise. He took an axe to his 2 children, whom he always talked about, and then blew up his house and died. Sometimes I wish I had taken the risk and tried to solve his case. I had many opportunities to do so. In fact, 2 days before he went postal, I had talked on the phone with him and scheduled a meeting to help him learn some programming concepts, because he was never really good at programming. I kinda got depressed after he's killed his kids and felt really shitty for not noticing some of the signs beforehand. That was almost a year ago. I have long since come to terms with the reality of things. He was definitely one of the creepiest people I've ever met.